Hello and welcome back to another episode of Break of Throw. I'm here with the former Premier League champion, current darts coach, Glen Durrant. And today we're going to take a look at two real thinkers of the game, Glen. Connor Scutt and Brian Raman. What stands out straight away with these two?
Well, certainly with Brian Raman, he's got a very silky throw at his best. Real students and understanding of the game, but we might be talking just a little bit about that fine line between thinkers, as you titled them, and the issues that can come across with a throw. But the Brian Raman throw at his best highlights to me why he was once the 2021 WDF #1 seed for Lakeside. I think he's slightly underachieved in his career, and I think his throw will tell you that.
Before we move on to Connor Scutt later in the episode as well, a really good year on the Super Series stage and a Challenge Tour last year. What are your initial thoughts with him too?
The hardest working dart player out there. And again, probably right on that fine line, because his throw, he throws exactly how he wants to throw. Whereas you'll get a lot of dart players who'll come up and say, oh, I have no idea how I throw. I just throw a dart. Connor's right on that. Just don't go any further with this, Connor. A student of the game, incredibly hard working, and if anyone's going to succeed in the career based on work ethic alone, then Connor Scutt is your man.
Well, let's start with the throw of Brian Raman. As you can see here, Glenn, it's all about hockey position in the first clip. Right down the middle of the hockey there.
Yeah, and for a coach, that's a coach's dream. We talked about the fact that you'll see players stand to the left. I call it the Merv King to the left. But when I really studied his throw previously, his actual throwing arm is, just off centre. Then you've got the Stephen Bunting. So for a coach, that's the dream position. I think Brian looks good. The first thing I'm looking for, there's the height of the elbow at that situation. And also, as I've spoken about many times, the eye line. So that flight is just underneath. So he can see with that left eye. It's telling me an awful lot as well that he's left eye dominant. So it's telling me straight away that that left eye is really important. That's the one that's staring at that treble 20, and the elbow height's great. He has that touch of a front elevation, which we'll see on the side on view as well. But opening conclusion of that is very, very good.
Perhaps it's just a coincidence that we're looking at Raman here, but you labelled him a little bit as a speedster.
Yeah.
Is it no coincidence that someone who's fast goes straight down the centre of the hockey, doesn't mess around going to the left or to the right? Maybe it's just a coincidence looking at Brian, but you kind of attribute that maybe to faster players?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's not something I would attribute to it, but I think it's an excellent point, and something that I might just look at the super quick players. But yeah, he gets on with it. His pre-throw routine, he's pretty much straight in the hockey. You can see their arm is lifting before he's in the set position there. But I think the side on view tells me an awful lot about what I like about this. So he's in that set play, so quickly. You'll get an awful lot of players which will go to the hockey, set themselves up before then lifting the arm. You can see that's all in one motion. Now, Brian is doing a little bit of coaching himself in Belgium. So he has a clear understanding. Just look at that flick of the wrist as well. That is a beautiful indicator to a player that you've thrown a good dart. So when everything is action, and he makes the game look really easy. We'll show you some finishes as well a little bit later that he does. He's very flamboyant. But if a student come to me with that throw, I'd be absolutely delighted.
And if we take a look at the Brian Raman darts, they've got those scallops which we talked about before, gives that indication of where they can grip. So someone who's a fast player doesn't have to think too much.
Yeah, it's just the one scallop as well. It's just right down the centre. And he said the rest of the dart, he doesn't really care about. It's pretty, hasn't got a great deal of grip on it. The whole point of that dart is right in the centre of it. And it's so important for consistency for a dart player. And grip is so important. Sometimes you can be fumbling around trying to get hold of that dart, especially with that transition from throwing the dart. So when he flicks that wrist and then that transition there, sometimes you can be not gripping that dart as much as you like to be. The scallops is quite a new bit of technology. I think a Joe Cullen's dart as well, where at that point you're going to be holding the dart exactly the same each time. But for me, that is how I see as a coach how a dart should be thrown. Incredibly relaxed, very flamboyant, very quick, though I would highlight, and I've said in comms many times with Brian Raman, that at times he's too quick. But he recognises that, and I think that's really important for a player. And I think he's just trying to find that real balance about not being such a speedster, not being someone there for the crowd. There's times when you want to do that. But I think for the benefit of his game, I just think he needs just to be a little bit more methodical, a little bit more composed. Certainly wouldn't slow him down, but I think he's working on the whole process. And just looking at that, if I was Brian, I think I'd be getting myself into that set position first.
Let's talk a little bit about the mentality side of it too, because Brian Raman was here at international pairs with Belgium, and he kind of took on that captaincy role, and that's something, it's a big task to take on, isn't it? And you kind of have to understand the mental side of the game, because you're not just looking after yourself, you're looking after your partner too.
Yeah, I used to use pairs as a real strategy as part of my game, playing that leadership role, but then that makes you stand on your own 2 feet as an individual. I've questioned his mentality at times, and I think a lot of speedsters are like that. When they look good, they look $1 million, and in Brian's own admission, he throws a lot of darts low, which means he's getting his timing wrong. But he recognises that, which is important, and so he should have. He has aspirations of wanting to be a coach in the future and being a real ambassador to Belgian darts as well. So I think it's very much he's still, he's still having a clear understanding about the game. But he is a player that's played 65 times as a professional player, but only reached the last 16 once in those 65 games. That stance, that throw, that posture, that tells me he should be doing better than that, which takes me to the question you said, is his mentality what it should be as a professional player? And that's the one thing I would question with Brian. Incredibly talented, but slightly, for me, just underachieved a touch.
Would you say he's improved at all coming off the Pro Tour, because mentality is a big part of that, and now he's got a chance to kind of come to the Super Series amongst other competitions and kind of break things down and understand where it went wrong for him, so that when he gets the opportunity to go back on the Pro Tour potentially, he can go with a new mindset?
Without being brutal, no. I don't think he's got better. I watched him at Lakeside, and it was the same session that Luke Littler played. I think it was Richard Veenstra. Richard Veenstra banged in 104 average against him. Brian was the number 1 seed, and he got up against Jared Cole and averaged 97.46. And I was like, come on, Brian. You're in I think it was the quarterfinal now of Lakeside against Richard Veenstra. It could have been the last 16, because he was the number 1 seed. The pressure was on him. He delivered it, because Jared Cole had a wonderful contingent with him, and he dealt with the crowd magnificently well. And when we talk about the mindset, he really gave it to them. As much as they were like shouting Jared on like a wonderful crowd that they were, he dealt with the situation, and I thought that was the time to kick on, and that was the best version of Brian Raman I've seen. So I'm still waiting for that breakthrough moment for him. There's no better stage as the one behind me, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was a weekly winner, a champions winner. That's how talented he is, but maybe that mindset needs to be improved.
Well, actually, last time he was here, he did make the final of the week he was in. And to be honest, I think potentially I did see a bit of improvement. I think with how often he gets to deal with like an intimate crowd now, he gets that experience of, okay, I know how to deal with the fact that I'm going to hear everything. You're going to hear everything when you're on that stage, and you can't really get around it. And I think having that experience, I think the first time he was here, he also made a finals night, but there was a visible difference. So perhaps by the time it gets to Q School this year or next year, that sort of steady improvement potentially could set him in great stead. But if we take a look at the Brian Raman throw a little bit more, he lifts his pinky just as he throws. Tell me what that's all about.
Eric Bristow did something very, very similar there. It can be just like a little indicator to you. I'd like to think that the one thing, he's got that pinky, but I like the follow through with the hands. Very Gerwyn Price-esque, the way he flicks it. That would be the indicator to me that I've thrown a good dart. Like I said, he knows where the camera is. He's flamboyant. He plays with real finesse, which is all nice. But I'd like to see a little bit of grit, a little bit of tenacity, a little bit of not engaging so much with the crowd, a little bit of professionalism, a little bit of match play. That's great. Like that. But certainly wasn't in the Glen Durrant book of, how to throw a dart as well. And I think that's what I would try and bring into his game. Super talented, and maybe his best years are still ahead. But as I reiterate, he has been number 1 in the world in the WDF system. Yeah,
we're taking a look at this 1-3-2 finish right now. Not exactly the traditional route to go, is it, Glenn?
That's the flamboyance that he has. That's... against a great player, Mark Durbridge, who's beat me up the last couple of times I've played him at the senior. So maybe that was that's what he's got in his locker. And I'm not just going to sit here and wax lyrical about every single player I look at. Brian Raman knows I like him. Brian Raman knows I like the throw. But I'm going to be, I've got to be really honest with him, and I'm still waiting for the very best of him. That never surprises me. 110 average wouldn't surprise me for Brian Raman. But what I would say afterwards, it potentially could come back with a 70 average to follow. So he needs to work on that consistency, but the talent is incredible.
It is an interesting point because he is a well-known, fantastic mathematician within the game. But I know he has a little bit of fun sometimes with Owen. He's one of the spotters saying, oh, I'm going to go this route. And then he goes a different route and he might check it out. He loves to leave double 13 and he referred to him a little bit as a spotter's nightmare. But perhaps when he's on the hockey, maybe he's thinking a little bit too much about what's behind the screens and not what's happening on the board.
Yeah, because he shouldn't really be thinking an awful lot. And every time I look at that throw, it just gets better and better. The thing with quick players, they don't have an awful lot of time to think. I just think it's part of his personality. The double 13 I like. It's in the eye line. I think dart players like where it is. Double 14 being similar on the other side of the board. We've seen over the years what Mensa Sulovic thinks of that sort of height from there. But, as a coach, if I would show my students who were just starting out the game that throw, I like it. There's not an awful lot wrong with that. Look at the elbow height I talk about so much. He's got to be scrutinised on where he goes next, because technically that is one of the best throws that we're going to be looking at in this series.
So from a coach's point of view, to sum it all up, technically absolutely fantastic. There's not much to improve on. So you would focus on that mental side of the game.
Skills and abilities are great. Attributes are what he needs to work on. And attributes, I'm talking tenacity, fight, preparation, routines, practicing. To be an all-round player, it's not just about being flamboyant and throwing 180s with your eyes shut like he can do. So I think if I was coaching Brian, I'd be trying to strip everything back about where he goes from, because the fundamentals are sound.
Well, there we go. That's the breakdown of Brian Raman's throw. After the break, we'll be taking a look at Connor Scutt. Welcome back to Break of Throw. We're taking a look at the throw of Connor Scutt. Glenn, we touched on him a little bit earlier in the episode, but talk to me again just about how good Connor Scutt is.
He's wonderful. Very complex, this break of throw episode could be. I would say the hardest working dart player on the circuit. Openly admits he practices 8 hours a day, which sometimes we go, yeah. But he uses a system where he's online for 8 hours a day. A real student of the game, and I've used that term before about him, and I've had a little bit of like, what does that mean exactly? But it's because he thinks about absolutely everything. And as I touched on there's the fine line between an overthinker and making the game become really difficult there. And he's just on that cusp of not really sure what to do. As we talk now, it's on the back of a couple of Pro Tours, and in his words, he's just bang out of form at the moment. Had we had this episode when he was playing in the pentathlon on the for England darts last year, where he was putting numbers that Luke Little would be proud of. But that's the beauty of darts. 1 minute we're a world beater, next we're scratching our head where to go next.
Well, let's have a look at the throw of Connor Scutt, and we'll start once again with the stance. A little bit like Brian Raman, kind of dead centre of the hockey, really.
Love it. Like I said, it doesn't surprise me with someone like Connor Scutt, and I think he experiments. So again, I can imagine, and I would expect any dart player over the years, but he realised he was a left eye dominant. He's done a little bit, there's a test that you can do, because there's a video in 2017 where he's thrown across his face, almost like, for people, the old school watching this, the old Bobby George would come right across his face. So he had to try and deal with that, because it wasn't getting the success out the game that he wanted to do. He had a couple of problems at that point. Number one was his darts would often bounce out the board. And number two, with him being left eye dominant, by coming over across your face, you're almost covering the target with that left eye. So between 2017 and onwards, he has stripped his throw down piece by piece. Now, that doesn't always work for everybody when you strip it down, but he knows exactly when he's thrown the perfect dart. And nobody knows a throw of how they throw a dart any better than Connor Scutt.
How difficult is it to kind of mentally take your throw and go, listen, maybe I'm comfortable with it at the moment, but there's just too much going wrong, so I have to start again. From a mentality point of view, it's hard enough getting it right from a technical point of view, but mentally, it's going to be a battle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a battle. And there's probably about 8 to 10 elements he'll look at. You'll often hear me talk about, and that's a great angle that we're looking at there. Even from the non-throwing arm, that's your balance. And as I've talked so much about your height of your elbow, your flight path, your wrist, your fingers. He throws from the thumb. So I don't know if I've mentioned that's your power. When you hold a dart, that's your power. Your thumb and your finger, they generate the power. And these are your accuracy, these 3 fingers. So you'll see people with one in the air. Similar to Danny Noppert, I would hold my dart with every finger on the dart. We'll see the greatest, Peter Manley and Phil Taylor would holding the dart with just one finger. So there's various sort of grips on there. And he throws from that thumb. So he uses only 2 types of dart, a very scallopy dart, very similar to sort of the Merv King, or sort of similar to like the Dum Dum dart, which is like Andy Fordham would throw. And I think he's used a Fordham dart over the years. But that dart is exactly what he needs for the throw he's got now for it to succeed.
Would you say there's a little bit of upward trajectory when he releases the dart? It's ever so slightly going up. He's not the tallest player.
Yeah, I think you've just answered it right at the end as well. I think the trajectory of the dart and the height it creates is because of the height of him. But people say, God, I wish I was a little bit taller. But the greatest of them all was only 5'7" in Phil Taylor anyway. So, and I love it when we then do a throw, because what will happen there is hand overtakes his dart. And I looked at a Luke Littler dart at Hyde Park this week, and the height between as he let go, we're talking like that. The height of his hand going forward to where the dart is. I reckon if we strip that throw down a corner, that could even beat that, because you can see there it's almost like he's aiming high to jump the hurdle of that treble 20.
Listen, we'll be here all week if we start talking about height of players, but I do want to touch on it a little bit more. What is the difference from a very tall player and a very small player?
Well, like I said, people said they'd rather. I had the luxury of commentating on Jimmy Van Ski on the MODUS Super Series last week. He's almost aiming down at treble 20. I don't think there's the perfect height. I mean, I've never seen a study where the ideal height of a player is. Again, the greatest of them all is Phil Taylor, 5'7". Michael Van Gerwen, round about 6'2". Third best player, your Bristows, your Gary Anderson. So there's no right or wrong. Gary Anderson's only 5'10", 5'11". So, but of course, you're going to see different styles. I mean, Jimmy Van Ski's the type of player who can just place him in the dartboard because he has that incredible lean. So that's why no 2 throws are the same. And the height is going to be really important as part of that trajectory. Jimmy Van Ski's dart are just pretty much going to go straight. If you're a little bit smaller, they're going to have the trajectory that we're talking about there, but I don't think there's an ideal height to throw a dart.
We're looking at the Connor Scutt darts here, and as you mentioned, it's got that scalloping, but the rest of it is really smooth. Why would he choose that?
Yeah, that's because he has got a dart where forget the dart, and he needs the scallop. He said forget the dart, and he has this uniqueness of a flight as well. He doesn't really care about the shape of the flight. His number one objective is for that dart to stay in the board, because he was a player where it would land in the treble 20 like that and then almost flop, because he holds the dart like a feather. He's look how softly throwing the dart there. Like I say, it's very elegant, isn't it? But the setup that he's used previously, that 2 of them darts could have fell out. So there's an awful lot about his choice of dart and choice of flight that he uses. But his blunt answer to it all is, I have a dart now that sticks in the dartboard. And there's no scientific reason from a guy who potentially thinks about the game more than anyone of why he has the setup that he has, but the scallop is key.
As we look at this maximum, you actually see a little bit of a twist in the Connor Scutt throw. Why does he do that? Because a lot of players just pull it out and the hand is almost exactly where it needs to be straight away, but it's not with Connor.
And he doesn't. It's not. When I said he stripped his throw down? So when he stopped going across his left-hand side of his face, now he's throwing more centrally, even more to the right. The spin is natural. It's not. He's not spinning the dart on purpose. It just happens as part of the throw that he's had. As that dart evolved, as he realised he was left eye dominant and he didn't want to come across his face, as he's bringing that dart from a different position now, that twist is just natural. And I think many people think he's twisting the dart to be a better player, to get it to stick in because of his dart. Again, sorry to disappoint, it's just as he throws a dart these days, that twist is as natural as it comes.
This maximum specifically is essentially perfect, and that means that the darts really work together when they hit the board, so that there is, like you said, less bounce outs. And something I know you know is that the flights were a major thought process for him. Talk to me a little bit about that change.
Well, only himself and Devon Peterson used that tri-flight. As you can see, the 3 prongs on it there. And as I sort of like dug deep with him and asked why them, and I was waiting for something like, yeah, Glenn, because the flight of the dart, the trajectory of the dart, the height that I give it, and it isn't, them flights help the dart stick in the board. And it's as simple as that. He has now found a dart where bounce outs are not as much of a problematic issue for him than they once were. And it's not about, oh, these flights are made specifically because they do this, that, or the other. That setup that he has now means he gets less bounce outs. End of conversation. And I was like, really? And I was expecting something a lot more scientific, a lot more that I was going to learn from it, and the balance of the dart. And, you know, is this a guy because he throws it so that I could use myself when I have a player who feathers the dart, who throws very softly? But absolutely not. He's worked hard to find a setup for him that bounce outs are no longer a problem.
And that's a change he made at the MODUS Super Series, and we can tell because of this clip where he attempts what is described as the perfect 9-darter. There's a lot to break down here, Glenn. As we can see, he's back to sort of those standard molded flights, but we can't talk about this clip without talking about the route.
Yeah. He's the one who wants the 180, the 171, then the 3 bulls, and I saw it. Yeah, you might have to tell me who did it last week, but I think there's a few players who are now attempting to hit the MODUS Super Series. I think we're calling it the perfect 9-darter. Like I said, it's a group game against a very competent James Wilson as well. But he wants that. He has done things as well on the dartboard which none of us have really done. I think it was a 1001 in something like 1920 darts, something like that. He's doing crazy things online. He's practicing hard as he can, and he's adamant he's going to get the perfect 9-darter.
It was Jared Cole who tried it last week. Andreas Harrison has been very close here as well. I believe he went 7 in. This isn't really kind of a breakdown of anything, but to be the first person on a televised event, potentially even a recorded event, I'm not 100% sure, to hit that, that'll give you some sort of like legendary status within the game, won't it?
Well, we've got the legendary status with a 150 finish alone with Simon Whitlock on the Euro Tour, and then again Thomas Banks last week, which was another incredible story. A lad who, you know, he was really struggling Monday and Tuesday. Yeah, that's what darts can do for you. The highs and lows of the game, and then he pings the 3 bulls, and the highs and lows are what Connor Scutt is dealing with at the moment. A year ago, we were talking about the brilliance of him, and it's in the locker. But as I sit here right now, you know, and chatting with him this morning, you know, his form's not there, and he's that, you know, that's where the overthinker can come in, and a little bit of panic can set in. Shall I put a longer point? Shall I change back to the normal flights? Shall I go back to the Andy Fordham dart? You know, and that's where a little bit of panic can go on, and you know, that's an issue that Connor Scutt will have to deal with.
Well, this clip does actually highlight a couple of technical points too. As we see when he lifts up his 7th dart going for that first bull, his flight actually rubs up a little bit against his face and it changes the angle of the dart. And to my knowledge, he doesn't, you know, stop, go again. He goes straight for it. Talk to me about that as a player, not just specifically Connor Scutt, but having potentially your dart rub up against your face. Because I know from a semi-pro level and potentially an even lower level than that, that's something what people deal with a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, mine was across the bridge of my nose with the first dart. And what's really important for elite darts and consistency is having the same throw each time and having a release point exactly the same each time. And you can see there with the perfect dart he's thrown, his flight ain't touching his face there. So maybe the adrenaline is flowing after a 180 and a 171. If you can get that backswing, if you can get that follow through the same 9 times out of 10, you're going to succeed in darts. I see many players where the first pullback will be short, the second will be from just short of the nose, the third one will be on the. So I think with that third dart there is just touching his face, and he'll know at that point that, you know, he's brought the dart too far back. But that's what adrenaline's doing. But I like individuality as well. I don't like robots. I don't like us to throw a dart like A, B, C, D. I like Connor Scutt to kick his leg in the air, to lose his balance and whatever, because it's really important that you don't then become an A, B, C, D guy of being very process driven, because that's when your mind can send you crazy when you're on the hockey.
And then the eighth dart actually highlights what you were talking about a little bit earlier about those bounce outs. We've touched on that. We've touched on how he's got around that. But what we've not really actually spoke about much is just how smart he is on the hockey. I remember a time where he went for double 17 to leave a finish, and it baffled Owen Binks, who was the referee at the time. But like what this episode is all about, he is a real thinker.
He is. He's a trailblazer. Like I said, no one ever thought about double 15 being the most successful double, and we're seeing the best player at the moment in Luke Littler doing that. Connor Scutt likes doing things differently, and double 17 sort of comes into that category. He's saying he has his own uniqueness. He used this real chalk grip, and also if you ever watch him as part of when he's thrown the dart and walks back to the water table, almost like he's got a comfort blanket in his towel as well. They're all elements as part of the process he needs to do. So when he's throwing the dart, you'll see him walk back. He'll adjust the grip on his fingers, because I think he's got very dry hands is the reason, or he needs dry hands. And then he has the towel and just to almost touch it. You know, I've seen players move things one way, the other way. I've seen a photo of the family. I mean, there's some real unique ways of when you're not throwing the dart. Almost, as part of their plan is like that's done, and then they move on. And I think they're the players who are working with sports psychologists, which are getting darts is getting bigger in that, and that's the mentality side of things there. And I think Connor Scutt is right up there with that.
One final point I want to talk about with Connor Scutt is actually about the practice, because as you alluded to earlier, he practices 8 hours a day, but there's actually a way for you to know that because he does it all online. And I know that he actually does it in front of an audience most of the time. He'll go and live stream his practice sessions, so he'll interact with people who are there as well. Obviously, I assume that wasn't something you did back in your day, but how does the dynamic change with that?
I did work hard. I would like to think I was one of the hardest working in my mind. There's times in my life I was practicing 6 hours a day, but the technology wasn't there. You can press a button now and be playing someone in Japan within 2 or 3 seconds, Canada, America, Scandinavia. So these young players are utilising that. In my time, makes me sound archaic, but in my time, it was, you were on your own, you practice with people now. And Connor Scutt's taking full advantage. And listen, he can press a button and be playing Martin Lukeman, Richie Edhouse, and lots of the others that are using these electronic systems as well to be part of that. I used to like to practice on my own. I think Connor would prefer to be playing and have a match practice as well. I know he has a coach as well who looks at his throw, and that's a big part of where the game is going to as well. So he's an all-round player who is striving for excellence, but he's just on that fine balance not to overthink the problem. But again, very similar to Brian Raman, the type of profile of players I'd love to work with.
Do you think it could potentially help him from a mental point of view? Because you kind of separate it, don't you? Your practice is behind closed doors. Not many people see your practice. You might choose a couple of practice partners, but that's it. And then when you're playing on a stage, that's when the audience interact. That's when you speak to people. That's when people watch. But having the people involved in your practice session, what do you think about that from a dynamic point of view?
Yeah, 2 words, role play. I used to pretend, this is where people might laugh now. I used to pretend I was playing Gary Anderson. Or if a draw had come out for Lakeside, I'd pretend I was playing Nick Kenny in the first round, second round Karel Sedlacek, until I was playing the final. So almost like when I got on that stage, I'd been there before. And I think that becomes real now with this. They can be playing these games and it's real. None of them are going there to lose the games. So it's almost like they're getting real life practice for that. It wouldn't be for me. It's not one size fits all. There's some who like to lock themselves away, like a Peter Wright, and do their own things. But you get the Connor Scutts of this world who just feed me with more matches. It suits him.
Well, there you go. That's the throw breakdown of Connor Scutt and Brian Raman with the former Premier League champion and current Starts coach, Glen Durrant. Make sure you stick to Pluto TV to watch more Break of Throws.